Sergei Lavrov's meeting with head of Arab states' diplomatic missions accredited in Moscow today, on October 2nd. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held a meeting with the heads of diplomatic missions accredited in Moscow and representing Arab states. The meeting took place at their request, and we received it in the late hours of October 1st. We satisfied their request, and the meeting took place. Its agenda consisted of an exchange of views on the developments in the Middle East, with a special emphasis on the continuing and unprecedented escalation of violence there. The participants in the meeting spoke out in favor of immediately ceasing the hostilities in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict zone. They also expressed their deep concern with the growing risks of the situation evolving into a full-scale war across the Middle East, with devastating consequences for the entire region, considering, among other things, the October 1st, 2024, retaliatory strike carried out by Iran against Israeli territory. They went on to emphasize that all the involved parties must renounce provocations, exercise restraint, and act responsibly in keeping with the existing resolutions adopted by the United Nations and its Security Council. The representatives of Arab states thanked Russia for its proactive efforts, including within the UN Security Council, to stop the bloodshed in the Israeli-Palestinian confrontation zone and bring the situation back to normal. The foreign minister and the heads of diplomatic missions reaffirmed their unwavering commitment to further coordinating efforts by Moscow and their respective capitals for bringing about a comprehensive and durable peace in the Middle East as quickly as possible by establishing a sovereign Palestinian state within the 1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as its capital. They also talked about what led to the current situation and described it as a tragedy, rather than an escalation, by designating among the causes the position of the UN Security Council members representing the West. They have been camping on a subversive position for a year now, which prevented this high international body from sending a strong signal and stressing that actions of this kind were unacceptable. Let me emphasize Moscow's concern with this new cycle of escalation in the Middle East. Russia has repeatedly warned against failing to resolve crises in this part of the world, primarily the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, since this can result in a major escalation. The Foreign Ministry believes that the United States bears much of the responsibility not only at this specific point in time, but also for the overall deterioration we are witnessing today. In fact, for almost a year now, the United States has been blocking the adoption of a UN Security Council resolution requiring a cessation of hostilities in the Gaza Strip and ensuring humanitarian access to its people. Once again, we call on all the parties involved to exercise restraint and refrain from making the military and political situation even worse, while preventing the region from sliding into the abyss of a bigger war. Not a single country in the Middle East would benefit from this catastrophic scenario. We expect all the constructive international actors to use any means at their disposal to prevent it from materializing. It is our belief that a fair resolution of the Palestinian issue is instrumental for improving the overall situation. Russia has been clear and open on this matter. We have regularly presented our position and follow this line on international platforms. Once again, we stress the urgent need to consolidate international efforts for achieving a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip as quickly as possible, and creating conditions for resetting a comprehensive political settlement process for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in keeping with the UN Security Council and General Assembly resolutions on the two-state solution. Opening of exhibition to mark 75th anniversary of diplomatic relations with the PRC. On October 3rd, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will participate in the opening ceremony of an exhibition of archival documents commemorating the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Russia and China, a milestone being widely celebrated in both nations. This important date is closely tied to the founding of the People's Republic of China on October 1st, 1949, a pivotal event in modern world history. We extend our heartfelt congratulations to our Chinese friends on this anniversary. Moscow was the first to recognize the newly formed People's Republic of China, doing so just a day after its proclamation. Over the past 75 years, Russian-Chinese relations have evolved significantly, reaching an unprecedentedly high level. The comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation between Russia and China continue to grow, serving as a model for mutually respectful dialogue and mutually beneficial cooperation between major powers. The exhibition showcases key milestones and memorable moments in the history of Russian-Chinese relations through a collection of archival documents. In addition to the physical exhibition, an online version will be available on the Russian Foreign Ministry's website for anyone interested in exploring this historical journey. Sergei Lavrov's upcoming bilateral and trilateral meetings with Foreign Minister of Abkhazia Sergei Shamba and Foreign Minister of South Ossetia Zakharova. On October 4th, Moscow will host separate bilateral and trilateral meetings between Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Abkhazian Foreign Minister Sergei Shamba, and South Ossetian Foreign Minister Zakharova. This will mark Sergei Shamba's first official visit to Russia as the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Abkhazia, following his appointment in August 2024. The ministers will address a broad range of current issues concerning Russian Abkhazian and Russian South Ossetian relations, along with foreign policy matters of mutual interest. The trilateral discussions will center on the evolving international relations system and regional security, with a particular focus on aligning strategies within the framework of the Geneva discussions on security and stability in the South Caucasus. Meeting of Moscow format of consultations on Afghanistan. On October 4, 2019, Moscow will host the 6th meeting of the Moscow format consultations on Afghanistan at the level of special representatives and senior officials. Alongside the regular participants, Russia, India, Iran, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, China, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan's acting foreign minister, Amir Muttaqi, has been invited as the guest of honor leading a distinguished national delegation to the Russian capital. The meeting's main proceedings, to be held behind closed doors, will be opened with a welcome address by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The discussions at the Moscow format consultations will focus primarily on advancing the Afghan national reconciliation process and enhancing practical cooperation between regional states and Kabul in political, economic, counterterrorism, and anti-drug efforts. A joint statement is expected to be issued following the meeting. On the sidelines of the event, Sergei Lavrov will hold a meeting with Amir Muttaqi to address key issues of bilateral cooperation between Moscow and Kabul. Sergei Lavrov's participation in the CIS Foreign Ministers' Council meeting. On October 7th, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will chair a regular meeting of the CIS Foreign Ministers' Council in Moscow. The foreign ministers will review the preliminary results of joint efforts on implementing the priorities of Russia's CIS chairmanship in 2024. They will discuss prospects for developing diverse cooperation in the CIS format, including deeper economic integration, efforts to counter long-standing and emerging challenges and threats, and expanding cultural and humanitarian ties. Special attention will be given to preparations for the 80th anniversary of victory in the Great Patriotic War, which will be celebrated in 2025. There are plans to exchange opinions on key international and regional issues. Following the meeting, the ministers are expected to adopt several decisions aimed at expanding collaboration in law enforcement, cultural and humanitarian spheres, and enhancing foreign policy coordination within the CIS. The ministers will approve a plan for multi-level consultations between national foreign ministries for 2025, as well as the date and venue for the next meeting of the CIS Foreign Ministers' Council. Most of the approved documents will be submitted to the CIS Heads of State Council and the CIS Heads of Government Council for consideration. Sergei Lavrov's participation in the 19th East Asia Summit. On October 11th, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will take part in the 19th East Asia Summit in Vientiane. This platform is part of the mechanisms of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and has always been a key element in the ASEAN-centric system of multilateral dialogue and cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region. ASEAN traditionally aims to focus the agenda of the East Asia Summit on pressing regional development issues, with an emphasis on strengthening the association's connectivity and expanding its cooperation potential. Plans are also in place to discuss the security challenges facing the Asia-Pacific region. Today, these challenges are primarily linked to the Western efforts to militarize the region, establish local NATO infrastructure, and create new blocs that serve as an alternative to the ASEAN-centric system of interstate relations, which relies on the principles of open and equitable collaboration. We can observe diametrically opposite trends, specifically efforts to facilitate NATO's destructive and aggressive undertakings. Russia invariably advocates for more profound, multifaceted cooperation with ASEAN. All Russian proposals at the East Asia Summit are based on this approach. This includes expanding collective potential in responding to epidemic threats, the prospect of institutionalizing this aspect of joint activities, the establishment of permanent consultative channels between tourism agencies, and support for volunteer projects, an important aspect of civic responsibility using the East Asia Summit platform. Additionally, we are ready to share our extensive experience of implementing national programs relevant to remote territories with our partners. During his stay in Vietnam, Sergei Lavrov held a number of bilateral meetings with his Asian counterparts. The first ministerial conference of the Russia-Africa Partnership in Sochi. On November 9-10th, Sochi will host the first ministerial conference of the Russia-Africa Partnership at Sirius University, in accordance with the decisions of the Second Russia-Africa Summit. The foreign ministers of the Russian Federation and African states, as well as the leadership of the African Union Commission and major continental integration associations, will take part in the event. The business program on the sidelines of the conference will feature roundtable discussions and panel sessions on key items on the Russian-African agenda, including security, trade and investment, industrialization, technology transfers, agriculture, the development of the mining sector, education, healthcare, and epidemiological safety. Representatives of Russian and foreign media are invited to cover the event. We are expecting African media outlets to take an active part. Media representatives can obtain accreditation on the Russia-Africa Summit's official website until October 25, 2024. The Ukraine crisis supported by its Western curators, the Kiev regime continues to use terrorist methods against civilians and civilian infrastructure in the Russian regions. The Banderites are extensively using various NATO weapons and UAVs loaded with explosives. On the second anniversary of the reunification of the DPR, the LPR, the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions with Russia, they are venting their hatred and aggression on the residents of these Russian regions, who made their legitimate and free choice during the referendums on September 23, 27, 2022, in favor of their future with their historical motherland. The Ukrainian Nazis may try all they want, but they will not be able to intimidate or spread panic among our people. On September 29th, the Ukrainian armed forces delivered 35 strikes at the DPR, 9 hitting Donetsk and 26 Gorlovka. Reportedly, 7 civilians were wounded, including adolescents born in 2012 and 2013. 16 houses were damaged. On September 30th, Donetsk and Gorlovka were attacked once again. A young man born in 2007 was killed, and 8 people were wounded, including 2 children born in 2007 and 2015. This is the kind of vengeance that the people who call themselves fighters for freedom, democracy, and justice unleash at children. Meanwhile, they keep running to international agencies and claiming that children are their prime concern. On September 29th, 56 shells were dropped on the Kherson region. 13 towns and villages were affected by the enemy's strike. In the early hours of September 30th, they also shelled Novaya Kakhovka. The Ukrainian armed forces launched a massive drone attack on Kamenka-Dniprovskaya in the Zaporozhye region, striking a recently renovated children's sports school. Apparently, the Banderites feel particular fury towards any children's infrastructure. Other targets hit included a power station, a petrol station, and a cafe where local residents were celebrating a wedding and a child's birthday. 1 person was killed. According to preliminary reports, the Ukrainian drone downed over Lugansk on September 28th was carrying a cluster bomb. The Russian Defense Ministry reports that in the early hours of September 29th, 125 Ukrainian UAVs were shot down over Russian regions. The biggest number, or 67 drones, were intercepted over the Volgograd region. 17 UAVs were destroyed over the Belgorod and Voronezh regions. 18 were downed over the Rostov region, and 1 in each of the areas over the Bryansk and Kursk regions, as well as the Krasnodar territory. 3 more were destroyed over the waters of the Sea of Azov. The Ukrainian Nazis continue to use FPV drones for deliberate attacks on the civilians in the Belgorod region. On September 18th, a service bus was attacked in Shebekino, resulting in 4 civilian casualties. On September 21st, an UAV attack wounded a tractor driver in the village of Oktyabrski. On September 22nd, the strikes at the village of Cheremoshnoye and the Shebekinsky city district left 14 civilians wounded. A civilian vehicle was attacked by a drone on the road between Chaika and Krasny Oktyabr, with the driver severely injured. On September 29th, an FPV drone strike at a car in Krasny Oktyabr wounded 3 women, including 2 severely. On the same day, an attack by a Ukrainian UAV on the village of Oktyabrski killed a fighter of the local self-defense unit. This is what Vladimir Zelensky's regime, for whom the use of terror methods has become commonplace, normal, and a policy, really looks like. These crimes are on the conscience of the Kiev gang and its Western masters. Russian law enforcement agencies are recording each of them. All those involved will definitely answer to the fullest extent of the law. Russian law enforcement agencies continue to receive evidence of war crimes committed by Ukrainian militants and foreign mercenaries in the Kursk region. A woman living in Kolbaki village said that Ukrainian armed forces militants are deliberately dropping incendiary mixtures from drones onto residential buildings in border areas. According to her, after these strikes, entire streets burned down. They do not care that there may be people in the houses who did not have time to evacuate. The Nazis and their Bandera followers did exactly the same in the occupied Soviet territory during the Great Patriotic War. In addition to that, people in the Kursk region report atrocities by foreign mercenaries. One of the locals told military investigators about the atrocities committed by Georgian soldiers of fortune, who threw grenades into basements regardless of whether there were people there or not. According to her, they really enjoyed cutting civilians and mocked as much as they could. The Poles were also savage. People who came to the temporary accommodation center in Kursk told journalists about the first days of the Ukrainian armed forces' invasion of the Kursk region, including the large number of civilian casualties. According to eyewitnesses, the Ukrainians warned the residents that if they did not leave, then foreign mercenaries would come and leave no one alive. According to a Sudzha resident, Vladimir Maltsev, Georgians, Poles, Frenchmen, all these mercenaries were exterminating people like cockroaches. And a lot of women were killed, abused, and raped. The investigation received testimony from a resident of Cherkashskoye Perekhnoye village, Sudzha district, who reported that his nephew was killed by Bandera supporters. He was brutally beaten and then hanged in a local church. This is what we are talking about. There is no line between Nazism, fascism, and Satanism. It is all one big dark force that comes if people allow themselves to forget about human dignity. In the backpack of a Ukrainian armed forces militant liquidated in the liberated Snagost village, Russian servicemen found documents and medals stolen from a World War II veteran, Nikolai Ptashkin. The awards were returned to the hero's youngest son, who, as it turned out, witnessed mercenaries from France and Poland desecrating the Russian flag, which they tore down from his house on the eve of the evacuation. Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis and mercenaries for war crimes based on evidence from the Investigative Committee of Russia. Ukrainian Armed Forces militants Daniil Vereshchak, Artur Sharamok, and Artyom Batyuta were each sentenced to 16 years in prison for shelling a road bridge on the Slavyansk-Donetsk-Mariupol highway on February 26, 2022, which resulted in damage to the state, disruption of transport communications, and the creation of obstacles to the evacuation of civilians from the combat zone. Latvian citizen and former Saeima deputy Juris Juras was sentenced in absentia to 17 years in prison for his involvement in military actions on behalf of the Ukrainian armed forces and for publicly spreading false information about the tragedies in Bucha and Irpin, located in the Kiev region. His compatriot Alvis Luxa, along with Australian citizen Abdel Fattah Nurin and Algerian citizen Qusay Louadahi, were also sentenced in absentia to 14 years each for participating in military actions on Ukraine's side as part of the International Legion. On September 30, 2024, the Supreme Court of the DPR sentenced Ukrainian serviceman Leonid Onupko to life imprisonment for mass killings of civilians in Mariupol. Russia's investigative committee has launched a criminal case against New Zealand citizen Jordan O'Brien for his involvement in military actions as a mercenary on the side of Ukraine, including the murder of civilians, targeted assassinations, and terrorist attacks in the Kursk region. The investigation is currently working to determine the whereabouts of the mercenary and his accomplices. None of the Ukrainian criminals, mercenaries, and their accomplices will escape justice, We have taken note of the article published in The Spectator on September 21, 2024, titled, "It's Time to Let Ukraine Join NATO." In it, former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, with apparent seriousness, claims that granting Kiev NATO membership could send a message to the Kremlin and bring faith, hope, and clarity to the Ukrainian people. Notably absent, however, is any mention of love. Such provocative remarks serve only to incite direct NATO involvement in an armed conflict with Russia. Boris Johnson appears indifferent to the potential consequences, showing little regard for the lives of millions of people. His cynicism was evident in April 2022 in Kiev, when he ordered that negotiations with Russia must be stopped and military operations must continue regardless of the casualties, up to the last Ukrainian. This is the same Boris Johnson who claimed to have a deep affection for Russia, citing his name and education as reasons for his admiration. The global community must realize that personalities like Johnson and others from this Anglo-Saxon Sabbath are pushing the world to the huge catastrophe. We suggest he take a closer look at the statements made by President Vladimir Putin on September 12th and 25 of this year regarding our response to any potential NATO actions aimed at striking deep into our territory, as well as at the updated fundamentals of state policy of the Russian Federation in the sphere of nuclear deterrence. Amid the worsening economic, energy, and demographic crises in Ukraine, along with rampant corruption permeating all levels of government, the Verkhovna Rada has expanded its efforts to eliminate any geographical references to Russian culture and Russia, including the heroes who liberated Ukraine from Nazi invaders. On September 19, 2024, on the second try, it passed a bill by majority vote to rename 327 localities, including several towns in the Russian Lugansk region. This initiative will likely be funded by the very Ukrainian people who have been robbed, humiliated, tortured, and oppressed by Vladimir Zelensky, instead of addressing their urgent, fundamental needs. The focus should be on survival. Kiev has a lot of more important matters to attend to. As part of a recent wave of name changes, the village of Chervone, Red, in the Lvov region, has been renamed Galitskoye in honor of the largest memorial to the SS Galicia division in the area. This marks the first time in history that an entire populated locality has been explicitly named after this SS unit. Where are the OSCE and all those who are generously funded by international taxpayers? Where are the representatives of the various organizations dedicated to preserving the memory of Holocaust victims? How are they responding to this? What is their assessment of the decision to name a village in honor of the SS Galicia division? Are they unaware of this? They remain silent. It is not trendy to speak out nowadays. In the Lvov region, the mining town of Chervonograd, Red City, has been renamed to honor Andrei Sheptytsky, a Nazi collaborator and the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church during the Great Patriotic War. This decision comes despite the fact that the residents of Chervonograd previously voted against any renaming in 3 separate city referendums. All of this is occurring amid an ongoing campaign of violence, a war waged by Ukrabanderites against the monuments and graves of the true heroes who liberated Ukrainian land from the Brown Plague. On September 21st of this year, in the village of Sadzhava, Ivano-Frankovsk region, the grave of Antonina Vereshchagina, a 22-year-old radio operator scout who died in 1944 during a combat mission at the hands of Banderites in the area, was destroyed. Her remains were exhumed for reburial, and plans were announced to dismantle the obelisk dedicated to her, if it has not already been removed. How can such actions be justified or assessed? How can anyone live with this reality? Despite the Kiev regime's efforts to review and distort history and to glorify Nazi executioners, it cannot erase from the memories of millions the names of the true heroes who saved humanity from Nazism and contributed to the development and prosperity of Ukraine over the years. These facts reaffirm the necessity of the special military operation aimed at denazifying and demilitarizing Ukraine and eliminating the threats originating from its territory. We are committed to ensuring that all of these objectives are achieved. Ukrainian armed forces links with terrorist organizations Ukraine opted for terrorist methods as a state policy instrument a long time ago. In fact, the Kiev regime does not hide its links with terrorist groups around the world, and in particular, on the African continent and in the Middle East. The international community's attention has been drawn to this more than once. In this regard, we note that an increasing number of states become aware of the terrorist nature of the Kiev regime. On March 1, 2022, on the order of President of Ukraine Vladimir Zelensky, the International Defense Legion of Ukraine, IDLU, was established and included in the armed forces of Ukraine. It is made up of mercenaries, adherents of extremist ideas, and outright terrorists from various corners of the planet, from the US, Canada, and Great Britain to individuals from the Caucasus. There are also radical Islamists in it, members of international terrorist organizations, including the banned ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Caucasus Emirate, who have experience in combat operations against the government forces of the Syrian Arab Republic. Al-Tanf, a U.S. military base located in Syria near the Jordanian and Iraqi border, and the adjacent area has long become a kind of a terrorist hub, where up to 500 ISIS members and other jihadists loyal to Washington are retrained at the same time. People from South Caucasus states and the Central Asia are given priority. Special units with them are aimed primarily at carrying out sabotage and terrorist acts against Russian armed forces units, including in Ukraine. The current Ukrainian authorities' links with international terrorist organizations can be confirmed by the information obtained during the investigation of the terrorist attack at Crocus City Hall. The perpetrators were migrant workers from Central Asia, and the preparation and financing of the attack were coordinated via the internet by members of the Islamic State Khorasan Province International Terrorist Organization. We can also recall the militants attacking a column of state troops in northern Mali in late July of 2024. Ukrainian officials, press secretary of the main intelligence directorate of the Defense Ministry, Andrei Yusov, and Ukrainian ambassador to Senegal, Yuri Pivovarov, directly stated their support for organizing the attack, which caused the immediate severance of Mali's and Niger's diplomatic relations with Kiev. Turkish and Syrian media published information about talks between representatives of the main intelligence directorate of the Defense Ministry of Ukraine, including its head Kirill Budanov personally, with Tahrir al-Sham, formerly Jabhat al-Nusra, on recruiting militants from the Idlib province, Syria, in order to train them and carry out joint attacks on Russian facilities. About 250 Ukrainian military personnel are reported to have arrived there to enhance the terrorists' capabilities through the use of unmanned aerial vehicles. All of this once again proves the terrorist nature of Vladimir Zelensky's regime and helps the global community see the true face of the current Ukrainian authorities and those behind them in the West. We believe that this practice of criminal cooperation between the armed forces of Ukraine and the International Terrorist International is absolutely unacceptable. We will continue to fight this evil spirit by all available means, regardless of where it appears, in Russia, Syria, or Africa. Moldova update. The Moldovan leadership persists in its hypocrisy to persuade the country residents that there is no alternative to the European integration project. They are threatening the people with what they call a Russian threat. There is no such threat, of course. In his remarks at the UN General Assembly on September 27, 2024, Prime Minister of Moldova Dorin Rasian alleged that Moscow was committed to changing the sovereign choice of the Moldovan people and to suppressing the dignity and will of the people of Moldova. Was he serious, or was this some kind of a Moldovan joke? So much so that a Moldovan traveling to New York stays true to his national identity and continues cracking jokes all the time. But once they come back home, they lose this part of their identity. There is an ongoing effort to reshape the Moldovan language and transform it into Romanian, while people are expected to designate themselves as Romanians rather than Moldovans. Everything Moldovan, be it culture, language, or ethnic and cultural identity, has been reduced to a token, just for show, a veneer. And this is the captivating narrative they are trying to present to the world. It is high time they made up their mind on whether Moldova has a Moldovan language, whether Moldovans inhabit this country, and whether they have a Moldovan culture and history. But if you travel to New York to speak at the UN General Assembly after subjecting the people of Moldova to all these nationalist experiments, you must keep calling them Romanians. Seeing a person who calls himself the Prime Minister of the Republic of Moldova as an advocate for the Romanian population would be quite an interesting sight for the global majority. 1 week prior to that, a PACE delegation summed up its visit to Chisinau by saying that disinformation supported by the Kremlin, illegal financing, and alleged vote buying represent serious threats to the country's sovereignty and security. It is quite telling that the Moldovan authorities, or should I say the Romanian authorities, have been actively relying on the anti-democratic practices I have just mentioned, and which have been falsely ascribed to our country. The country persists in its efforts to cleanse its media landscape. On September 25th, it blocked 5 Russian news websites: RIA Novosti, Nezavisimaya Gazeta, Crimea Television and Radio Broadcasting Company, TRK Krim, Krimskaya Gazeta, and the official website of Crimean Republic's State Council. The block also covered a website explaining to the people of Moldova the possible consequences of European integration. I would like to draw your attention to yet another fact demonstrating the way Maia Sandu's regime has been discriminating against Russian journalists. Yesterday, a correspondent from RIA Novosti's diplomatic desk was denied accreditation to cover the presidential election in Moldova from Chisinau under a far-fetched pretext. He did not receive any follow-up explanations. This is the way the Moldovan authorities have been cleaning up the national media landscape. Making it impossible for the opposition to make its voice heard has become a favorite for the Moldovan authorities. On September 23, 2024, senior executives from Radio Moldova, a national broadcaster, refused to air a campaign clip for Vladimir Voronin, the leader of the Party of Communists. Why did they do this? Because he criticized the way Maia Sandu's team did its job. This brand of democracy, European integration, contains undertones of a liberal dictatorship. On September 26, 2024, they took a similar decision regarding another presidential hopeful who called for banning the propaganda of non-traditional values in schools. In fact, Maia Sandu's regime did a lot to place into the national spotlight the topic of destroying the traditional family and nurturing all kinds of wrong practices. For example, on October 10, 2024, Chisinau is scheduled to host yet another LGBT festival. Its organizers chose coming out events, that is, when people publicly disclose their non-traditional sexual orientation as the festival's main topic. This is simply insane. However, despite all these efforts by the Moldovan authorities to instill what they refer to as the European values, people can see through these efforts and know what underpins them. In fact, Maia Sandu's sponsors have made no secret of their efforts. On September 27, 2024, the EU ambassador in Chisinau, Janis Mazakes, let it slip while on the air that one of the consequences for Moldova in its European project would consist of enabling foreigners, meaning Western transnational corporations, to buy agricultural land in the country. The Western transnational companies will rob this country, all while inviting the people of Moldova to join these LGBT parades. People will lose their historical lands after their forefathers spilled their blood to defend this territory, after their fathers cultivated this soil, which yielded fantastic harvests and were celebrated across the Soviet Union for these achievements. This caused a scandal, and the EU ambassador mentioned just a fraction of what is being planned with regard to Moldova. The Moldovan leadership rushed to denounce Mazak's words, while pro-government broadcasters conspired behind closed doors to stop inviting him to speak during their shows. If Maia Sandu has a message for the people of Moldova about European integration, she must make sure that those who actually represent this movement get an opportunity to speak their mind. Let the EU ambassador to Moldova answer all these questions and tell the people of Moldova what he has in stock for them. Therefore, it is hardly surprising that Maia Sandu's support has been rapidly waning not only in Moldova, but also across the Moldovan diaspora abroad. Even Moldovans living in Western Europe, who voted her into office in 2020, are turning away from her. There have been protest rallies calling for Sandu's resignation in the UK, Germany, and France. But the pro-government media in Moldova would never report this back at home. I was told that people in Moldova had to go to great lengths to find links to the blocked Russian media outlets, our briefings, and how they have been relying on Russian social media accounts to get their news. It went as far as banning any video recording during the recent meetings held by the President of Moldova with her compatriots in Italy for avoiding any sensitive or embarrassing moments. And all this is taking place because behind all this fake narrative coming from Chisinau on the triumph of European integration
The country is coming apart. Its people are more divided than ever, while Moldova is about to lose its sovereignty. It's high time for the Moldovan leadership to recall who it is supposed to serve instead of trying to conceal its incompetence by parroting about what they call the Russian threat, since the people of Moldova can see through this rhetoric. U.S. military building in the Asia-Pacific region, we can observe increasing trends in the persistence of Russian strategy to militarize the Asia-Pacific region with the support of its regional and European allies. Intensive efforts are underway to synchronize the actions of key U.S. strongholds in Asia, including military political alliances such as U.S. Japan, Republic of Korea, U.S. Japan, Australia, AUKUS, and Southern Australia, which includes a nuclear weapon, U.S. Japan, Philippines, Troika, and the Indo-Pacific Quartet, Japan, Republic of Korea, and New Zealand.
A special role in the U.S. extended deterrence system has been assigned to the U.S., Japan, Australia, India quadrangle, which is based on a force component. This includes regular military exercises and cross-agreements between the participating countries aimed at facilitating various aspects of military technical, and military political cooperation. It is particularly noteworthy that the creation of an Indo-Pacific security architecture in the Asia-Pacific region that is centered on the United States has a secondary civilian component. At the same time, specific areas intended for military applications are being identified, including initiatives on maritime security, control over water areas, and high-tech sectors such as space and artificial intelligence. The Western efforts in this regard also include linking climate issues to security, which can be seen as an attempt to create new opportunities for implementing the old and dangerous idea of humanitarian interventions. It is telling that even in healthcare, priority is being given to the development of relevant tools under the Pentagon's supervision. A well-known example is the U.S. biolaboratories deployed worldwide, including in East and Southeast Asia. Remember, such laboratories were found in Ukraine after the special military operation was launched. We know firsthand what American and other NATO military doctors are doing, as evidenced by the situation in Ukraine. The recent Quad Leaders Summit, Wilmington, Delaware, September 21st, followed the same pattern. One paradoxical illustration is the decision to involve the U.S. Navy Medical Service in implementing the Quad's cancer prevention program in Asia. National Council of Switzerland recognizes Holodomor as an act of genocide. We have noted that on September 24, 2024, the National Council, the lower house of Switzerland's parliament, passed a statement recognizing Holodomor as an act of genocide. The document alleges that the Soviet leadership had deliberately perpetrated this act in order to destroy the Ukrainian nation. They are insanely spreading an ideological myth, fabricated for Ukraine or inside Ukraine by those who are ready to falsify history beyond recognition. Clearly, nationalist and Russophobic forces are behind this. Yet another anti-Russia step by Bern highlights a substantial change in Switzerland's position, acting in line with time-serving considerations. Its MPs are trying to divide the common tragedy of Soviet nations along ethnic lines, while renouncing an objective assessment of historical reality and facts. It should be recalled that in the 1930s, apart from the Ukrainian SSR, a terrible famine was raging across many regions of the RSS, including the Volga River area, the Central Black Soil District, the North Caucasus, the Ural, Crimea, and parts of western Siberia. Additionally, people in western Ukraine, then part of Poland, Romania, and Czechoslovakia, also suffered from famine. What do the people of Switzerland think about this? I realize that they have no idea of European and Soviet history, as well as their own history. However, the authors of this political decision and declaration that resounded all over the world should have clarified at least some facts. In this connection, one would like to ask the following legitimate question. Why are Swiss MPs not accusing the then leadership of their European partners and current partners, who are spreading Russophobia once again, of committing an act of genocide? Bern's politically biased attitude confirms the fact that Switzerland has lost its neutral status and the status of an unbiased intermediary, honest broker and mediator as they called themselves, in resolving international conflicts, so actively promoted by its authorities. Russian foreign ministries report on the indigenous rights situation in certain countries. The Foreign Ministry of Russia has posted on its website a report analyzing the indigenous rights situation in 6 Arctic Council member countries, namely Canada, Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, and the United States, as well as in Australia, Japan, and New Zealand. In recent time, the United States, Canada, and their allies have been active at international universal venues, in regional formats, and the media, trying to shift the focus from the vital problems facing indigenous peoples in North America and the Western member countries of the Arctic region, as well as in Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, to the alleged violations of indigenous peoples' rights in Russia and a number of major developing countries. At the same time, practically all the above-mentioned countries have pursued, in some form or another, assimilation and discriminatory policies towards their Aboriginal populations, something that has created numerous socio-political and cultural problems. Today, many countries develop mechanisms for coordination and cooperation with indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples in various countries are confronted with common problems that include a gradual erosion of their traditional way of life as a result of earlier assimilation policies, violation of the indigenous people's rights to lands of traditional inhabitants and natural resources, decay of the natural environment due to industrial development, and certain countries' overseas military activities, high unemployment, and indigenous communities' dependence on government subsidies. The worst affected by these negative phenomena are countries in the Arctic region, where the above-mentioned problems retain their relevance. As a result, there is a need for solutions, including those suggested by the international community, and this is the reason behind the compilation of the above report. This agenda was included in the first joint report on the human rights situation in certain countries, produced by the foreign ministries of Russia and Belarus, and published in June 2024. The Russian Foreign Ministry's annual reports on human rights issues also systematically address these subjects, including those related to the glorification of Nazism, the spread of neo-Nazism, and other practices that contribute to fueling contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. The latest report was issued in September of this year. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's article about post-war partition of Germany and Austria. The Enlightenment Mission on the History of the Second World War was the Foreign Ministry's special area of focus led by Sergei Lavrov. It has already become a permanent effort against the falsifiers of the past. Today, we present the article on the circumstances of the division of Austria and Germany into occupation zones by Sergei Lavrov, released by the Bulletin of the Security Council of the Russian Federation. It is available on the Russian Foreign Ministry website. I will give you a few facts, since there is a reason to do so. The 75th anniversary of establishing the FRG and the GDR in September-October 1949. The resolution of the German and Austrian issues was a meaningful, if not the key, part of the post-war settlement in Europe. In 1955, Austria became a neutral country, from which foreign contingents were withdrawn. Germany, on the other hand, became an arena of global confrontation between the two systems, as they used to say. It is now clear that this was a confrontation between the forces that really wanted peace for all in the long term, and those that kept the vestiges of Wantu era for later as a reserve. That being the case, the Soviet Union eventually formalized the termination of Germany's occupation status, while the United States did not. There are still American occupation troops, numbering tens of thousands of personnel present in the FRG territory. German politicians themselves say that after the Second World War, Germany has never been sovereign in the full sense of the word. Moreover, it was the United States that opposed Germany's reunification. The present is undoubtedly rooted in the past, and the events unfolding in the world today always have their causes and historical foundations. Today, reconstruction of the world order and its adaptation to the multipolar geopolitical realities is on the agenda. What is important is to draw the right lessons. Those who take up the task of engineering the future world order should thoroughly learn from the post-war settlement of Germany and Austria. That period is rich in the factual material presented in the article by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, the global significance of BRICS. A fair share of questions asked by representatives of the media always have to do with BRICS, the Russian chairmanship, and the upcoming summit, which is only 3 weeks away. The BRICS summit will open in Kazan on October 22nd. We have been repeatedly asked about the significance of this association for the new, emerging polycentric world, about its accomplishments, as well as what we are offering, and how this can be explained to the average person without overusing political slogans or conceptual philosophy. Allow me to start by stating that BRICS is a unique format of interaction between states representing different religions, civilizations, and cultures, aimed at creating favorable conditions for economic growth of the member states, addressing social problems, and enhancing innovative human potential. In accomplishing these goals, the member states are guided by the principles of equality, mutual respect, openness, and a balance of interests. The first ministerial meeting in the BRIC format at the time was held on September 20th, 2006, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly session in New York at President Vladimir Putin's initiative. It was attended by the foreign ministers of Russia, Brazil, and China, and India's defense minister, who expressed interest in advancing multifaceted cooperation in a quadripartite format. In 2011, South Africa joined the group. The decision to expand BRICS made at the Johannesburg summit in 2023 can be described as historic without exaggeration. On January 1st, 2024, Egypt, Iran, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Ethiopia joined the association. With the inclusion of the new members, the BRICS palette became even richer, brighter, and more diverse. Its international standing and positive influence on global politics, and its capacity to defend the interests of the global South and East, or the global majority, became significantly stronger. Since then, more than 30 countries have applied for rapprochement with BRICS in one form or another, which definitely reinforces my point. The member states share similar views on the modern world. They support multipolarity as the foundation for sustainable development, the central coordinating role of the UN, the principles and norms of international law, rejection of forceful pressure policies or infringement on the sovereignty of other countries. I am confident that in the current conditions, BRICS has enough weight to promote its own solidarity vision of the future world order, which should reflect the multipolar realities and be based on the cultural and civilizational diversity of the modern world. The group's economic influence is steadily growing. As President of Russia, Vladimir Putin noted at the plenary session of the Russian Energy Week International Forum on September 26th, in the foreseeable future, this growth will be concentrated not in Europe or North America. They are gradually losing their weight in the global economy. This growth will shift to BRICS countries and the states that are willing to join our association and view equal cooperation with due respect for national interests as the promising way to proceed. Another shared objective that keeps our association together is to reform the outdated global financial and economic architecture, which does not reflect the increased economic weight of the BRICS countries and other regional centers of power. We reject unlawful economic sanctions, which spiral into trade wars. We insist that the dollar and other international financial instruments should not be weaponized and deem it unacceptable to use them to coerce other countries, impose political will on them, and sometimes even destroy their economies if they are in no position to resist. The development of partnership within the BRICS is our strategic priority. This year's theme of Russian chairmanship is strengthening multilateralism for equitable global development and security. Its main priorities are formulated in the concept of the Russian Federation's chairmanship of BRICS in 2024, approved by President Vladimir Putin. In our work, we primarily strive to stand up to the challenges and threats of our time and find collective solutions to the global challenges of international development. Specifically, we focus on a wider use of national currencies, joint payment instruments, and platforms in mutual trade transactions. Our combined efforts are aimed at promoting and building an interconnected and interdependent international system on a non-aligned and non-hegemonic basis, which would give precedence to such common priorities as economic growth, poverty alleviation, food, climate and water security, combating international terrorism, extremism, and organized crime, etc. Our immediate objectives are to ensure the seamless integration of new members into the existing BRICS cooperation mechanisms without compromising their effectiveness, as well as to develop the modalities of a new BRICS partner country category, along with a list of potential candidates. The work within the BRICS framework is non-confrontational and constructive. It is a viable alternative to a world living by someone else's alien rules. The association is building a new ecosystem of political and economic relations between its member countries and with other states of the global majority. The 8th Eurasian Forum of Young Diplomats. On October 1st through 4, the Russian Foreign Ministry's Council of Young Diplomats is organizing the 8th Traditional Eurasian Forum of Young Diplomats in Moscow. The forum highlights the implementation of the Foreign Ministry's horizontal diplomacy program, aiming to expand a network of platforms for the informal communication between young diplomats, state officials, and experts. Its purpose is to strengthen the atmosphere of trust and mutual understanding between young employees of foreign policy agencies of friendly countries. The forum's main theme is called Eurasia in a Multipolar World: Challenges and Prospects. Its 4-day program includes a discussion of key strategic aspects of Eurasian integration development, including a cultural and humanitarian agenda, traditional economic cooperation spheres, and prospects for asserting Eurasia as one of the most significant centers of the modern world's development, as well as the transformation of the media landscape and digital solutions. The forum will involve over 40 participants from 15 countries, including Russia, Abkhazia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Iran, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, China, Cuba, Moldova, Mongolia, Serbia, Syria, Tajikistan, and South Ossetia. Key events include the official opening ceremony and a discussion on cultural and humanitarian cooperation issues, expert sessions dealing with new media outlets of the multipolar world, sport diplomacy, youth cooperation, a plenary session on Eurasia as a pole of the multipolar world, and the role of cross-integration dialogue in forging a new global economic system, and approval of the concluding document. At the end of the event, there are plans to admit new members into the International Association of Young Diplomats and to sign a bilateral cooperation agreement with the Council of Young Diplomats of South Ossetia. Representatives of the Russian Foreign Ministry's leadership, legislative and executive agencies, academic and business circles, experts as well as famed athletes, will take part in the work of the forum. I would like to invite representatives of Russian and foreign media outlets to attend the forum. World Space Week is observed from October 4th to 10, and the Russian Federation has been supporting this tradition since its launch by the UN General Assembly a quarter of a century ago. It marks 2 major dates in the history of space exploration: the launch by the Soviet Union of the first human-made Earth satellite on October 4th, 1957, which opened the space era, and the signing of the Outer Space Treaty on October 10th, 1967, as a cornerstone of international space law. Considering its status as a pioneering space nation, our country persists with its proactive efforts to develop its national space program and has consolidated its standing as a leading space power which enjoys full sovereignty in terms of its space launch capabilities. We firmly believe that the near-Earth orbit must remain open to constructive, equal, and non-discriminatory cooperation for all countries. The Soviet Union has built a legacy in this sector, and it must live on. Outer space must remain a domain for peaceful exploration, scientific cooperation, humanitarian ties, and it must remain at its best at all times. However, we are currently facing a real threat of turning outer space into a bulwark of aggression and military confrontation. This results from the policy by the United States and its allies to assert their military dominance in space. Russia believes that transforming outer space into an arena for an armed confrontation would be unacceptable. It is our hope that the World Space Week under the UN auspices will contribute to shaping a unifying agenda for a peaceful space future for the entire humankind without dividing it using the garden versus jungle metaphors. Soviet and Russian diplomat Yuri Vorontsov's 95th birth anniversary, October 7th, marks the 95th birth anniversary of Yuri Vorontsov, a prominent Soviet and Russian diplomat. He started his career as a rank-and-file diplomat and went on to become USSR's first deputy foreign minister. Moreover, Yuri Vorontsov embodied and impersonated an entire era of diplomatic success and achievements by our country in international and bilateral frameworks. In his foreword to a book of recollections titled Diplomat Yuri Vorontsov, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov praised Mr. Vorontsov for the way he served his country while heading its embassies in India, France, Afghanistan, the United States, and working as the USSR's permanent representative to the United Nations. As a true citizen of his country and a patriot, As well as an effective professional with all his creative energy, a rare sense of tact and intelligence, and unique set of human qualities. He has every right to be called a diplomat, with a capital D, and his name has become part and parcel of Russian and international diplomatic history, Sergei Lavrov wrote. Yury Vorontsov has made a meaningful contribution to our country's foreign policy action whenever international relations reach the most challenging stages in their development. He was among the first to work on the reduction of strategic weapons and took part in the Geneva talks on disarmament and nuclear test bans. He also made a substantial contribution to signing the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987. In 1988, he headed the Soviet embassy in Afghanistan and oversaw the withdrawal of the Soviet troops from this country in this capacity. As the Soviet and then Russian permanent representative to the United Nations, he worked hard within the Security Council to counter attempts to settle the Balkan crisis by force and to prevent NATO's eastward expansion. After retiring from the foreign ministry, Yury Vorontsov continued to work within the UN international system. Yury Vorontsov was also active in cultural and educational undertakings by serving in senior positions in various civil society organizations and helping return the cultural heritage left by the Roerich family back to Russia. In fact, he was the de facto founder of Moscow's International Roerich Center. Yury Vorontsov received many Russian and foreign distinctions, including the Orders of Lenin, October Revolution, 2 Orders of the Red Banner of Labor, as well as the Order of the Badge of Honor and the Order for Merits to the Fatherland, 3rd degree, the Order of the Lotus India's highest award for foreigners, etc. In 2009, the International Informatization Academy Board established the Yury Vorontsov Medal. It is bestowed on the Academy's active members, including diplomats, researchers, and community leaders, for their meaningful contribution to the world's sustainable development and defending Russia's interests.